Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's Tuesday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight,
we are firmly committed to fulfill our responsibilities and to implement all the processes that need to be implemented.
a raft of promises to attract and pacify mining industry investors, but very little about the industry's attitudes and treatment of workers, mining communities, and other stakeholders. We give a voice to those with less of it.
We follow our own processes, and we will follow the evidence at the end of the day in our decisions to prosecute or not to prosecute.
Well, NPA head Shamila Batoyi repeats her promise. South Africa is going to see major prosecutorial action in the next 6 months. Our panel for this evening weighs in. And is Cyril Ramaphosa edging closer to re-election as party president come December? Well, our political desk takes a look. All that and more coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. Just under 1.2 trillion rands. That's the value of minerals that were produced in South Africa last year, well above the 910 billion rands achieved the year before. That's 2020. No wonder then President Cyril Ramaphosa today, in his keynote address at the big mining indaba in Cape Town, went all out, telling investors about how his government was dealing with such bottlenecks as the delays in mining rights and water use license approvals, as well as energy supply problems and other key operational impediments. My colleague Nompumelelo Siziba is at the indaba and gets us going.
Thousands of delegates from around the world have descended on South Africa's shores to explore the investment opportunities in the African mining sector. President Cyril Ramaphosa welcomed delegates this morning, and while he lamented South Africa's decline in the Fraser Institute scoring of the country's investment attractiveness, specifically in the mining sector, he outlined the work government is doing to improve the business environment.
We understand very clearly the need to fix the regulatory and administrative problems that have crept into the system. We need to clear the backlog of mining and prospecting rights and mineral rights transfer applications and put in place a modern and much more efficient cadastral system and implement an effective exploration strategy. We understand very clearly the need to significantly improve the functioning of our railways, which have fallen into disrepair, our ports, which are not performing at the level that we want them to perform, and the vital importance of ensuring a secure and reliable supply of affordable electricity.
The president referred to the government's recently released exploration strategy and implementation plan, which talks about further exploring metals such as copper, nickel, cobalt, and rare earths, adding that South Africa was well poised to take advantage of growth in these metals, given the country's endowment in platinum group metals. Analysts say this is positive for the continent at large and that financing is available to push this frontier of mining.
We believe at ABSA that there's definitely, financing capabilities as well as enough instruments to actually assist the companies in Africa, to develop the newer projects coming up. However, what we definitely need from the African countries and governments is to make sure that it's a stable political environment, like regulations are very clear, for investors coming in.
The president noted that the mining sector's fortunes could not improve if the working and living conditions of workers and those of communities did not improve, urging the mining sector to ensure inclusive growth and development. Nompumelelo Siziba, SABC News, Cape Town.
Well, we did, of course, go through the president's speech. In other words, beyond the bite or two that our colleague Nompumelelo Siziba had in that packet. And certainly from the head of state speech, very little indeed was said about the plight of communities affected by mining, or mine workers, who toil underground. Here's the little that we found when we gleaned through that speech.
The growth and development of mining in South Africa will not be possible unless the working and living conditions of the people who work in the mining industry, as well as the mining communities, are improved. Gone are the days when corporates ignore what is happening to their workers in terms of their livelihood, and gone are the days when we ignore what is happening in the communities in mining areas. We now have a responsibility, all of us, as the public sector, as in government, the private sector, to ensure that we have benefits that are going to flow to all those who are involved in the ecosystem of mining. It is important that mining companies engage with labor in a spirit of partnership and cooperation, completely shorn of hostilities that lead to problems that we will be creating for the future. It is vital that mine safety and the health of workers becomes the industry's foremost concern. On this, there can be no compromise. The mining industry has also demonstrated its responsibility to the communities in which it operates and where it is located. It is important that this commitment is sustained in all areas of development, including through the effective implementation of the social and labor plans, responsible environmental practices, as well as local procurement.
President Cyril Ramaphosa, the bites we could get from the speech that he delivered today at the mining indaba in Cape Town. And as many of you who have been following this story would have seen, heard, witnessed, heads of state have been speaking there since yesterday. Captains of industry, CEOs of mining companies, financiers, all the powerful people from all corners of the world. So tonight we felt we should give a voice to those whose voices aren't being heard or aren't even present at that indaba. And joining us are representatives of two organizations that play in that space, that do a lot of work among and within communities. Christopher Routledge is a director at Makua Office Advice, and there of course, that stands for Mining Affected Communities United in Action. There's also WAMUA, which is Women Affected by Mining United in Action. Christopher represents both those organizations. We also have Hassan Logat, who is the head of media at Benchmarks Foundation. Now, many of you will remember the Benchmarks Foundation from the work that it has been doing within the community of Marikana, among others, researching a lot of things there and bringing that information to the fore and to the attention of all of us. Gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Well, it was. I've just said what or outlined what gave rise to this evening's conversation. As you were watching, the opening speeches from yesterday and the reports, whether it's in newspapers, on radio, and everywhere else, what went through your mind, Christopher?
Yeah, thanks, Vuyo. So I must be honest and say that I'm deeply disappointed in what the president has been saying and what the Minister of Minerals and Energy has said in his opening address. And I'm disappointed for a very simple reason, that what the president is standing on an international podium and saying is absolutely not true. We have done research, we have done studies, we have done what we call social audits. So we audit mining companies to see whether they are delivering on these social labor plans. We're releasing a report now in June, which again shows, we did one in 2018, we're doing one now again in 2022, and it shows that we visited and we studied 10 mining affected communities across the country, different metals, different minerals, and what we're finding is a consistent pattern that mining companies are not delivering on their promises. Now, so number one, of the 1.2 trillion that they claim to have produced in the country, less than 1% of that they claim to send back or to put back into development of communities. Our research has found that between 70 and 80% of that money is not reaching communities. In fact, communities are becoming poorer by the day. Added to that is the simple fact that the Minister of Mineral Resources made a commitment to mining affected communities after we delivered 50,000 petitions to Parliament that they would engage us on what the South African Human Rights Commission recommended around putting in place legislation that will protect the interests of communities around this concept of free, prior, and informed consent. He has not kept his promises. In fact, he called us to a meeting once and then cancelled at the last minute, and we haven't heard from him since. It's a year later. The Portfolio Committee is the very same. The Parliament, the people that we are supposed to be, that's supposed to represent us, they made a commitment to engage communities. They haven't done so. A year later, they still haven't done it. You know, and then add to that, today Amabungani releases an investigative report which shows that the ANC itself has benefited in a mine in the Karoo on something like 500 million rand they benefited through Chancellor House. Now we are sitting in a situation where the government, the ANC government, is writing the rules and they are playing in the game. Now that is not a fair playing field. They are lying to the public, they are lying to the international investors, and this is going to come back and bite them. Why? Because we live in the most unequal country in the world. If they think that this poverty that they're creating in mining affected communities is going to stand and nobody's going to respond, then they've got another thing coming. Because communities are getting fed up with this. And with South Africa's high unemployment rate, we are headed for a spring. We are headed for an Arab Spring like we had in the Arab Spring when youth unemployment was so high. This is the same conditions that they're creating, and they're creating it to generate wealth for themselves and for a small group of individuals, because that money, the mining money, is not coming back to the communities that are hosting them.
Hassan, what have you heard, seen, observed over the past 2 days of the mining indaba, and what have you thought about it?
Yeah, it's more of the same. And I agree with Chris. I mean, I want to probably just put this in a package, for example. So the one big problem we have as those of us who work with mining communities is that the characteristic is there's an externalization of costs. So that's the first rubric I want to try and talk about. And there's also a privatization of the profits. So I'll come back to that. And then the last part is there's a limitation on democracy that Chris touched on now. So the first issue, externalization of costs. You know, mining communities have been dying. Mine workers have been dying. The Minerals Council says on their website, it is a sad and unfortunate reality of the South African mining industry that over the past 150 years, more than 80,000 mine workers have died, and more than 1 million have been seriously injured at work. And of course, they preface this by saying that mining is good for people, right? Now, I don't understand the logic of that it is like a war, that some people have to die so others can live the rich life. So the president did not touch on this, the sacrifices. He should know, as a young organizer in the NUM in 1980s, 1982 when they formed it exactly to turn this around. But what has happened now? So the externalization of costs is that it is okay for these workers to die so that some can profit. The second issue is that if you look at what the Auditor General said, they did an audit. They found that the department's management of the 6,100 abandoned mines and the 1,170 mine openings were ineffective, and it did not address the environmental, social, and health impacts of unrehabilitated mines within the set time frame. I am reading from there. What does it mean? Is that it's okay for poor people, for dark people, for those on the margins of society to drink dirty water, acid mine drainage, and suffer environmental degradations. This is the externalization of costs. Of course, on the privatization of profits, you know what the mine workers did. They protested and embarrassed the president on May Day, because as they were demanding 1,000 rand increase, they heard that 4 CEOs were getting 700 million, and of which one of them, Neil Froneman, was getting 300 million as a person for outstanding monies of last year. So that inequity is what Chris spoke about in terms of the World Bank finding us to be the most unequal society. It is not uncommon to find agricultural workers, shop workers, and others earning 4,000 rand. They are the working poor. They cannot earn enough to save. They just have to work. It's like a cycle. You got to keep cycling so that you can stay alive. My final point on this first segment, they limit democracy, and Chris touched on this. Mining communities have no voice in the minerals regime, in the mining law, right? The MPRDA, we call it. We have no say. We have no redress when something is wrong. We have to go to the Human Rights Commission. We have got to go to Public Protector. But there is no internal mechanism where mining communities can seek redress. And that is a fundamental undermining of democracy. We have.
Is it for lack of trying, Christopher, or lack of leadership, or as you were suggesting earlier, it was a question of it's a question of people benefiting from the corruption you're saying is endemic?
Yes. I think, unfortunately, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it seems to us, after having been studying these things over a number of years, it seems to us that as if there is a systematic effort to really exclude communities. Now, in the colonial times, apartheid, communities had no voice. Even in the first white paper in 1998, when the first post-apartheid legislation was developed, mining communities weren't really considered. There was one line in that 198-page document which spoke about communities, and it was basically, let's talk to them. That was the and then over the years we haven't seen that improve. In fact, when Gwede Mantashe came in as minister, he made a concerted effort to direct the budget of the DMRE away from compliance issues, so away from supporting communities and the country generally to check on mining companies. Are they delivering what they say they're delivering? Are they doing what they said they're going to do? He's taken money away from that towards promoting mining. So now we're getting all this new mining contracts coming in, licenses being issued left, right, and center, but we haven't dealt with the core issues that we still carry from colonial days. And Hassan has spoken to that very eloquently.
So just to make sure I hear you correctly, Christopher, you say saying that it is not, these compliance issues aren't being addressed, not because there may well be, say, lack of capacity, not because industry may be very good at hiding these things, in other words, evading scrutiny and so on. You are saying that there's a deliberateness on the part of the government to make sure that they actually get away with murder.
I'm afraid so. That is the only conclusion that we can come to. When the state is taking away money from compliance issues and shifting it towards marketing issues, then I understand the country needs money. But at whose expense, as Hassan was saying, at whose expense are we going to generate these private profits that basically leave the country? It is not left here, and we've shown that in our research. We engage with Department of Mineral Resources on a regular basis. We have a case in Kralhoek where it's a deep rural community in the northwest, where we have shown the DMRE that the mine is not compliant, that the mine is impacting on this community in a very negative way. These people are committing suicide. They are at their hope, they've given up hope that they can ever see justice. And the Department of Mineral Resources blatantly just refuses to hold them to account. And we find this in place after place after place. Now, often they say we don't have the people, we don't have the budgets, but I've looked at the budgets and they're shifting money away from compliance towards marketing. Now, if that is not a systemic undermining of the very people that you're supposed to be protecting, then I need to go and have my glasses checked, because this is a problem and nobody's picking up. The media is lapping up what the government is saying, and people are dying as a result. And this is a very serious issue, and the media doesn't seem to take it into account. Obviously, I understand when government announces they're going to give grants that they generated out of mining royalties, everybody's happy. But at what cost? At whose cost are we doing that? And for me, that's a real problem. And we don't see Parliament shifting that. And like we said in our open letter to Parliament, that how can a junior party member hold a senior member of the party to account? How are they going to hold Gwede Mantashe? Gwede Mantashe is very arrogant. He's very straightforward. He's very direct. He doesn't allow anybody to tell him where he can get off and where he can get on. So how is that portfolio committee going to hold him to account? That portfolio committee is toothless. It does nothing but comply to whatever Gwede Mantashe wants them to do. And Gwede Mantashe has made it very clear. He's driving us towards more and more mining with less and less compliance.
Hassan, I'm just thinking, just on the back of what I was going to ask you something else, but just on the back of what Christopher, just said. Someone raised the point. I'm not sure whether you were part of that conversation on the day as well. Someone raised the point, the contradictions in having a minister who is responsible for mining on the one hand, and the same minister is responsible for energy. That there is an inherent problem there that just makes things worse instead of getting any better. And I'm reminded of this by what Christopher has just said, albeit he was talking about something else.
Yeah, for me, the issue is that South Africa is a glorified mining town. You had the Oppenheimers, you had the Rothschilds, you had all these guys before. And now you've got the secretaries of the NUM in government. So these guys understand mining, they understand energy. The question that we were hoping should be answered is that, will they use that knowledge in favor of the poor, the most marginalized, or for the elites? You asked Christopher a question about whether this was by design or it is by error, if you like. This is not just a South African problem. Various authors have written about it. It is an externalizing machine. I've just told you that the numbers of people that the Minerals Council basically admit to having died. I mean, if you look at the figures that they gave for last year's deaths, 72 mine workers died. The year before that, 52 for the same period. It is like, this is it. It's a war zone. The children of workers must go and fight, right? This cannot be a mistake. It is part of the design. We got to understand it. Screw the environment, pollute the water supplies. Last week, Sri Baga wrote in the Mail and Guardian about a Zambian lead mine administered by Anglo-American. And they knew for decades or a long period that people were being poisoned. The water was being poisoned. I mean, really, you know, people are dying. Is it that much more expensive to fix up the problem? No, profits come before health. Profits come before life. We need to put this very, very straight into the hands and the minds of the president. They have lost the plot. They are not looking after the poorest in the mining sector. They're not looking after the workers, and they're not looking after mining communities, because mining communities remain disenfranchised.
Well, I mean, there are other things, Christopher, that are poisoning the environment to take from or to steal from Hassan. And one of them is something South Africans have been talking about over the past week or so. And it's something that you guys touched on earlier. You know, I mean, Froneman's 300 million, you know, a year package got South Africans talking, and everyone are starting to revisit the whole, you know, argument of, you know, I mean, how much does a person, you know, need to earn, really, you know, especially in situations where, you know, workers, in the case of Sibanye Stillwater, are asking for 1,000 rands, which he is refusing to give to them. And I put this to the Minister of Finance last week when we had an interview. Take a listen to what he had to say, and I want both of you to just, you know, tell us what your thoughts are on, I mean, his response in particular, not so much perhaps, I mean, Froneman. Everyone is appalled by Froneman's salary. But take a listen to what Enoch Godongwana had to say.
The income inequality, some of which reflects the apartheid past, is part of the problem, because it undermines the social cohesion we're trying to achieve. But to my knowledge, Minister Patel is piloting a change in the Companies Act, among other things, trying to deal with this question.
What's the thinking, though? Is it fair, especially, you know, in the Sibanye Stillwater case, for example?
Yeah.
I mean, currently they are busy. I mean, strike workers are having none of.
I don't think it is fair. I don't think it is fair for some one individual to get that amount when the ordinary folks that are working hard on a day-to-day basis, collectively, they can't get that amount. Is a problem.
Christopher, the finance minister says, who is not, I mean, who is just, I mean, as powerful a minister as would be your minerals and energy minister, says it's not fair. Undermines social cohesion. Or do you think that such voices don't get heard either, in the same way that you were saying, you know, communities affected by mining aren't being heard, whether by the executive or the legislature?
Look, I accept that we are in a capitalist society in which value of contributions are not equally valued, right? So we are saying that part of the problem in South Africa is the way that the wealth is distributed. How do we get to be the most unequal country in the world? It's essentially because we are not distributing the value that is created in our country equally. That sits at the heart of it. So, you know, the minister with all due respect, I mean, we can all say that it's unfair, but what are we doing about it? I think that is the crux of the matter. What exactly are we doing about it? We are not seeing them in the mining sector move towards a more equitable distribution of wealth. Our research is showing that time and time again, the patterns that we saw in times of colonialism, in the times of apartheid, continues to this day. Nothing has changed. Nothing in the legislation has changed. There's one element in the legislation which was put into the legislation, which was called the Mining Charter. Now, the Mining Charter was struck down in court last year, and the minister has subsequently said that they are prepared to go back to Parliament to look at the law and to make an adjustment to a more equitable outcome. Portfolio Committee Chairperson said that he would do the same. We have been trying to engage Parliament and the Minister to say, you've said you're going to engage, you're going to work on this legislation. When are you going to do it? How are you going to get us involved? They're not involving us. They're not discussing it. All we see them do is meet with business. Now, if you're meeting with the very people who sits at the heart of the inequality, who are the beneficiaries of this inequality, you're not going to find a solution there. Nobody, capitalist society is very selfish. And we can see it with the mining companies. They hoard these billions of rands worth of profits, and they're not sharing it. We, as the state, need to force those people to divide the resources more equally. Now, if the state is not doing it, if the state is sitting in its fancy chairs and fancy offices and say, oh, it's so unfair, but doing nothing about it, that helps nobody. Really, it is a waste of time. I don't know what to say. The state has just abandoned everything that we fought for, everything that people died for. They've abandoned those things. There's no longer a question of everybody shall share in the wealth equally. I mean, that's forgotten. Now it's every man for himself, and whoever grabs the most, well, good luck to you. And that's unfortunate. It's such a sad place that we've ended up. And if nothing changes, then something will change. That's unfortunately the history has proven to us that this cannot continue. And government doesn't seem to take it seriously.
Quick last word from you, Hassan. What can we still do to make sure that, the voices of those that are not as powerful as those who are at the mining indaba,
I mean, I'm glad to hear a former union organizer who organized with me, Godongwana, say that something is wrong. So we agree on that. But as Chris says, what is to be done? Praveen Gordon, in one of the most recent books on remuneration, points out, as much as Chris has pointed out, that the executive pay follows the apartheid patterns and paradigms. Cheap labor and elite CEO pay, right? These are the patterns. So this has been identified 2 years ago in this book, if you like. But it looks like the political will to tackle the powerful is not there. It's not there. Also, there's no real democracy, even in a social democratic sense. I mean, this commodities boom, how can Froneman claim that how can one CEO claim that they are responsible for it? Other factors, Russia, etc., etc. So clearly, shareholders are weak, lack of shareholder activism. We have much work to do, but it looks like our government and regulatory bodies are absent. It's left to the civil society groups to fight this battle on their own.
And that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thanks to both of you for your time and for your insights this evening, Hassan Logat and Christopher Rutledge. Well, after the break, the NPA has promised Parliament that in the next 6 months, we're going to see some action. How are they going to do it? What are their chances? What do they need to do to be able to deliver on that promise? Our panel looks at that in a moment. Welcome back. The National Prosecuting Authority is prioritizing 9 high-level corruption cases, which will be ready for court within the next 6 months. National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batoi, says the investigating directorate has identified those cases. Batoi, addressing members of Parliament's Justice Committee, says these cases speak to the heart of state capture.
3 former municipal.
Batoi told MPs the National Prosecuting Authority has faced a lot of scrutiny and criticism about its ability and capacity to prosecute. With state capture for long being at the center of the South African narrative, the NPA has been under pressure to secure convictions. But Batoi says the NPA will remain independent and follow its own processes.
Whether a name is mentioned or not mentioned in the Zondo Commission report will not be whether the NPA prosecutes or decides not to prosecute. We follow our own processes and we will follow the evidence at the end of the day in our decisions to prosecute or not to prosecute.
Batoi says she is aware high-impact prosecutions do improve investor confidence and that her team has ongoing engagements with the Zondo Commission. But she warns that corruption cases on the court roll could decrease, reminding lawmakers that prosecutions cannot just focus on being a numbers game.
It's possible that our numbers of cases prosecuted in corruption matters could come down as we focus on the more complex, on the more high-profile matters. So I think we must be careful that we don't get into the numbers chasing, which was the case in the past, where all of the simpler matters were put onto the roll to ensure that we met these targets, but at the end of the day, the real cases were not being, in inverted commas, targeted.
A lot of focus will be placed on the successes of the investigating directorate and its new head, Advocate Andrea Johnson.
We have undertaken, Chair, seminal cases, and we are very aware that this must not only make an impact, but this will go a long way to kickstart our drive to restore faith and credibility in the NPA. Finally, there is a renewed energy, understanding and appreciation, Chair, in the ID of what our mandate is, why delivery is non-negotiable.
The NPA gave a breakdown of its conviction rate, which now stands at 75%. It says while COVID-19 did have a negative impact and caused many backlogs at courts, things are slowly starting to normalize. The authority says despite the negative image and public perception, it puts the improved conviction rate down to the hard work of its advocates. Batoi also dismissed claims that the authority bases its prosecutions on skin color, again saying cases are evidence-based and that prosecutions target criminals across the color bar. Abra Barbia, SABC News, Parliament.
Well, to discuss this, we are now joined by legal expert Ritumetse Piri and the director of Dubazana Attorneys, Ntabiseng Dubazana. Good evening to both of you. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Well, Ntabiseng, I mean, a month ago or so, the National Director of Public Prosecution said pretty much what she said today.
She is tasked with a very difficult job, unfortunately. She's stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, having a background, I don't come from NPA, but I worked very closely with the NPA in the department I was in a few years ago. The kind of backlog that they have, the kind of work that they have to deal with, and the kind of investigations that they have to deal with is quite a lot. And having 900 plus cases in terms of corruption that they need to deal with, it is a daunting task. And having said that, from what I just saw in the clip that you played, she says that the number may decrease depending on how the investigations go. And I think I understand why she would say that, because there's some that are will be deemed as if they're not as serious as the others, that demand more public attention than the others, that will make them choose whether or not to place them on the court roll or not for prosecution. I understand where she comes from with that. But having said that, you still wonder if letting the small fish go would be a good idea in order for us to catch the big fish, the way that it seems that she wants to conduct the the prosecution at this stage of corruption cases.
She did also say, or should I say, underscore the fact that capacity is still key.
Yeah, just to go back to what you said a month ago, she said exactly the same thing, and earlier in the year, again in Parliament. And we all know that the NPA was not spared, the negative ramifications from the Zuma years. Capacity was hollowed out, morale was at record lows. There was, about a 25% vacancy rate in key areas. Senior prosecutors had left. So it has been a hollow shell, and Advocate Batoyi has, over the past 3 years, worked hard to at least get some of those more simpler aspects of getting a functioning organization going. I think what was really encouraging today was to hear that, the NPA has decided or has earmarked that it requires between 750 million to $1 billion to implement this program over the next year or so, which would involve even bringing in capacity from private advocates and private attorneys to assist them with these complex prosecutions. So I think for me, that was really, really important to hear, because we know what the state of the NPA is, and without a plan to capacitate in important areas, this plan would have fallen flat. And to know that they've at least put a number of what they need to ensure that there's success in these cases was at least encouraging to hear.
According to Shamila Batoy and Tabi Singh, and I quote, "This is our razor-sharp focus. Primarily, it is on the ID, and the head of the ID, Andrea Johnson, was there, and she was the one who told the Justice Committee that we are now, quote, poised for action." So she seems confident that she is not only up to the job, but she's going to deliver on the promise that they once again made before Parliament today.
We hope it's not empty promises. But like Ritumetse just said right now, the fact that they are going to employ or put into the confidence rather private advocates and private attorneys to assist, because the NPA situation is in a dire state. I mean, if you go to court on a daily basis, the prosecutors are inundated with so many cases, and on a daily basis, there are new matters that they have to decide whether or not they're going to go to the court roll or not. And then we still have a backlog of old matters that are not yet finalized. We have part-heard matters. It's a whole mess. So the prosecutor that is in the court is dealing with so much that if they don't get help to deal with these new 900 so cases that are now going to be on the court roll, they might in fact fall flat on their face. So I hope that they're prepared to deliver this time on what they have just put forth before Parliament.
Can you sort of perhaps share with us your understanding, of what Advocate Johnson said, and I quote, were seminal cases that will talk to the heart of state capture. In other words, without having heard anyone, telling you what those are, what did those words sort of tell you?
I think those are very strong words. And I think if we look at, for instance, the latest state capture report, right, we are then expecting cases relating to asbestos matters in the Free State, which some are already ongoing. The housing debacle in the Free State as well, which implicated Mosebenzi Zwane. I think we're going to see some prosecutions relating to Eskom and Transnet in particular. I think Justice Zondo was very clear and scathing as to the role of some individuals there, including, Machela Koko, Anoj Singh, Regiment, etc. And if we just roll back, to Dumieni, we're already starting to see some prosecution relating to, for instance, contempt of court, etc., which I think is actually a good strategy. I think, the ID and the NPA, if they bookend these big matters together with some of the smaller ones, because if someone did issue a fraudulent document to obtain an asbestos tender, why are we still, faffing about when it's quite a simple matter to say you made an incorrect representation? And I think we can get the ball rolling on some of those easier matters while we do go then for these seminal matters which the ID is targeting, which, certainly I'm looking forward to, given the state of that state capture report and what it points to what happened in our country in recent years.
Obviously, those implicated are not going to take this lying low. They're going to push back. They are going to use every avenue. They are going to, spend every cent, that they lay their hands on to make sure that the work of the NPA is extremely difficult, if not impossible. And among the criticisms that have been leveled at the NPA, SABC, is that they have often rushed to, the courts, but without enough to work on. As a result, many cases would collapse, or there would be these numerous delays for which they have also been criticized.
Yes. So what happens usually in court, once the investigations are finalized and the state then informs the court and the defense attorney that, all right, investigations are done, then they hand over the case docket to the defense attorney. And then we go through it meticulously, because remember, our job is to make sure that we defend our client to the best of our ability. And if we find technicalities, for example, broken chain of evidence and all of those things, that those technicalities that then end up making us make things that we call representations to have the charges withdrawn because they don't have sufficient merit to continue with the matter, those add to the delays. I think that's why Ms. Toy, when she spoke earlier in the clip that you played, she's like, can it not be a numbers game? Can we be focused on actually getting the job done? She said that in the past, they used to focus a lot on the small cases in order to get the ball going. And then as a result, the cases that needed priority from the NPA were not successful as a result. So I think they're trying to be as meticulous, they're hopefully at least trying to be as meticulous as they possibly can to make sure that the investigations are properly done, that they follow the letter of the law. And remember, because they're getting information from the State Capture Committee, the act, the State Capture Act states that, when it was amended by Dr. Ramaphosa recently, you cannot use evidence that is self-incriminating that was said within the hearing against these people that have now been implicated. So now they have to do their own investigations over and above what is being given to them and make sure that it is so concrete enough that there's a prima facie case against the accused persons. And even if we do get case dockets, well, not me specifically, but the defense attorneys then get the docket, there is not sufficient grounds for them to try and delay the matter because they need more information for this, more disclosure of this and that, or making representations for the matter to be provisionally withdrawn until the state has its house in order, stuff like that. So we hope that they will try and make sure that this time things are done properly and thoroughly.
And of course, Ritumetse, not forgetting the fact that they still depend a lot on what your other law enforcement agencies like your Hawks have to do first before the NPA can actually go to court.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think the criminal justice system as a whole is just sitting in a bit of a tenuous space, right? Because when we do speak about these conviction rates, for instance, that supposedly went down because of COVID, it's not painting the full picture. Just to tack on to what Ntabiseng was speaking about earlier, almost half of the cases that go through, for instance, the South African Police Service get removed in court for a number of reasons, right? The investigations were not done well, and those that go through, there's an over-reliance on guilty pleas, it's minor matters, etc. So when we actually look at the full picture, if you look at, for instance, also the referrals from the SIU onto the NPA, we're not having enough of a throughput. So I'm concerned, for instance, if Shamila Batoyi is saying we're going to have less cases through the system because it'll make the conviction rate seem higher, but in reality, what it will mean on the ground is that we're actually losing the war against crime because it matters how many people feel like they will actually get caught when a crime has been committed. So the system as a whole, right, and even the criminal court, I think, needs to be a little bit more efficient. I saw a report that it sits on average between 4 and 5 hours a day, which obviously we need quite an increased effort with the number of cases coming on, with the complexity. So I think the criminal justice system as a whole and the various role players really need to dig in to ensure that we do a lot better on the score.
Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it. Special thanks to both of you, Ritumeti Piri and Ntabiseng Tubazana, our guests for this evening. To this now, with each provincial conference that passes, the closer Cyril Ramaphosa seems to be moving to being re-elected ANC president at the party's 55th National Elective Conference this coming December. Well, that's if, though. The pronouncements of ANC provincial chairpersons elected so far is anything to go by. Abongile Dumago takes a look.
ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa continues to enjoy a maximum support within some of the provinces. This trend started during the January 8th ANC celebrations in Limpopo, where Provincial Chair of the ANC, Sten Matabata, pronounced that Ramaphosa will be backed up by the province to make sure that he returns as the ANC president. This came as a shock to many, including ANC National Executive Committee members, for they said it was out of the ANC culture. The party insisted that it was too early to make pronouncements because of the ANC usually gives a go-ahead at a set time to start lobbying for positions. But Matabata didn't back down.
That is why, without fear of contradictions, Limpopo says Cyril Ramaphosa for the second term.
And as recent as last month, newly elected ANC Mpumalanga provincial chairperson Mandla Ndlovu told delegates on the last day of the provincial conference that Ramaphosa should not say no should he be nominated for the second term of the ANC position.
I'm saying today in front of you, all of you, that Comrade Presidency if there is a call from branches as a true cadre of this movement, Presidency accept that call.
As if that was not enough, the ANC in the Eastern Cape has followed suit, showing support for Ramaphosa to occupy the office of the president for the second term. Re-elected provincial chairperson Oscar Mabuyane made it clear over the past weekend that a second term would be suitable for Ramaphosa.
Comrade President, you must avail yourself when you are nominated by branches of the ANC. So that you can lead ANC for another 5 years.
Thus far, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa says there still has to be internal party processes in this regard. It remains to be seen whether other provinces will resort to back Ramaphosa for a second term. This, as Zweli Mkhize, NEC member and former health minister, is said to be vowing for the position of ANC President during this coming December National Elective Conference. Abongile Dumako, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, 7 months to go still. That's a long time in politics. And that's our show for this evening. To join us again tomorrow night, 8 p.m. sharp. Good night.